You know, it's interesting where we draw lines of pathology and where certain phenomena in the past were not pathological, where we draw the lines now and suddenly it is. And so I think there's a real certain kind of arbitrariness to this.
I think this issue of time really is a critical thing, but in essence, my argument would be, I mean, as Bill says, it is, of course, there's an arbitrary line, but the reason that time becomes important is because it's finite, right? If we had infinite time, we could go back and forth and keep going forever, but it is this keen sense that time is limited that is in the background of the importance of allocating it in some way.
Right, so, I mean, one thing that, perhaps to explain it another way, a line I like from a movie called Office Space is someone is asked what they do if they had $1 million, and he says, I do absolutely nothing. For me, I think it's important because what that reflects is the goal being pursued here in, say, the pursuit of value isn't that value itself. It's because by pursuing value, we can actually extend our time in a different way. We can find ways to spend our time the way we actually want to, which could actually be distraction. So I guess what I wonder for you is, what do you think about other types of resources that are being involved here that change the way, not only in which a finite time can be spent, but how that finite time can be stretched in different ways? And also, how exactly it is that instead of just thinking about useless versus useful in terms of distraction and attention, that in fact we often pursue things that are useful precisely so that ultimately we can do things that are useless.
I think this statistic is sort of interesting in thinking about the question of whether, in fact, there are means of using time or expanding time or saving time or extending, having additional resources. What I would say personally, and I'd be curious to hear what my colleagues have to say, is that it's a little bit like these task managers, right, which allow you to be more efficient, but ultimately, no matter how efficient you are, there's still a limit. So you may be able to get more out of by marshaling resources in different ways. But ultimately, it doesn't necessarily feel like you actually have more, because the more you have, it is this paradox of the contrast between the limited and the limitless. Yeah. Paul, did you want to say something to this, or do you not? Well, does anybody want to address this point first, or okay, then.
You make a distinction between distraction and attention, and distraction really isn't inattention; it's attention to something else. And what I'm wondering is there a third state? For example, I've never done meditation, but I've spoken to people who have, where the aim is to empty your mind of everything, not to go from being attentive to something to being attentive to something else, but being attentive to nothing. And how would this fit in to the scheme that you're thinking about and working with?
Bill's probably a good person to address this.
I tried to give a 30-second glimpse of that. That was the goal of presenting the cage in quite a literal sense. I think that what one discovers when meditating, and especially when one focuses completely, letting go of concepts of words, of self and other, is that there's a kind of compression of time. And one can have an experience where maybe an hour goes by and there's no sense of time whatever. It's not that it's quick, it's not that it's slow, but it's not there. And it's also a very concrete experience. And so I think that it's something when stepping into that and seeing life from that perspective again, that our usual sense of time shifts somehow. And then what is important, what's really of value in life also tends to shift. It's not so much time is money, but time is something we experience here and now. And how focused can we be within that?
I guess one thing I was thinking about is how we often put distraction and attention on opposite ends of each other, but what about boredom, the state of because the work and play are the two dichotomies that we seem to work with today. But at this, maybe just from reading Dream of the Red Chamber again, I feel like a lot of the girls in the garden feel they're actually bored most of the time, and they want to distract themselves from their boredom. And so I wonder if the state of boredom is also another, it's not quite meditation, but it's another state.
Yeah, so, I think the point that you raised, Paul, is a really interesting one. What's common to distraction and attention is really this connection to an object. And often, I think, possibly in meditation, it is this sort of the mindfulness that is somehow related to objects but not attached to them, right? And in that sense, I think this Jia's comment about boredom is an interesting. It's sort of this detachment that's maybe the opposite of mindfulness. I'm not sure. I think Ed and then Steve.
Yeah. Thinking about distraction and concentration, mindfulness, I'm led to ask a question, but perhaps I'm too distracted actually to formulate the question. But it seems to be an important one to me because I have to remember things, being in the teaching or professing racket, and often I cannot find the answer. It's in there somewhere. And I was asked a question online, which happens to me very infrequently, but somebody told somebody about me, and I got a message on the email from a person I did not know, who ran a website, which I had never seen. And he'd gotten the word that I had published a book, and he wanted to know how I decided on the title of the book. And I told him that it came to me out of a shower spout, because when I was trying to think of what I would call the book, I simply could not. But when I was taking a shower, it came out with me, to me. So it seems to me that distraction can be a very valuable thing. It's not a negative thing. It happens also in a more vexed and discussable manner when you realize that you're musically illiterate, but you love music. And so I go to a concert where the people who know music are intellectually active, and they know whether the pianist is hitting the right note or not, and I really can't tell, but this tends to be the really blissful experience to me, that I'm distracted from having to know things that I can enumerate and explain scientifically. So it's a great freedom to be distracted, and it might even have some use in artistic matters where something comes from you, to you, you know not from where, because you're distracted. That's not a question, that's just a statement, I'm sorry.
Stephen Owen and then, Mark Elliott.
I'm sort of worrying about categories here. The capacity of technology to give us our greatest desires to the nth degree is interesting. It not only gives us the TV with 300 channels, it also gives us computer games. And the question is whether a computer game is a distraction or the most intense form of attention. The nature of time in a computer game, which virtually disappears, right? And I'm just trying to put that into this world, right? It's certainly there's no gain in it. And the people that do it, find it great pleasure, but it is the most intense form of attention I've ever seen.
I originally actually wanted to talk about these Chinese professional sort of online mass video game players, gold miners, who actually do this for a living. They play 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, and then they sell the virtual goods, the wealth that they accumulate online for real money on eBay. And so this is actually like they're called virtual sweatshops sometimes. So like the presence of these gold miners really blur the distinction between work and play and what is serious work. Yeah, actually, like one observer went to investigate these Chinese gold miners and try to figure out what they do after work, and they go to an internet cafe and still play the same games for fun. So.
There's a question here. Yes.
I don't know whether I expressed this very well. I was thinking about the idea that being distracted is useful, that he was saying sometimes. And I was thinking of this lady over here who is knitting. And I do things like that in order. There's a part of your mind that will wander off and you're trying to concentrate on something unless you use a sort of lesser thing that's like a distraction to push it back all the time. It's like kicking your leg all the time while you're trying to think, or knitting, or playing music or something like that, in order to, that is, you're doing a thing that if you were a child in school, they might say, pay attention, stop doing that. You're doing that thing in order to focus another part of yourself in a way that you think is more profitable, but you're also allowing yourself to do a thing that people might call a distraction, and you're profiting by that.
I think Mark Elliott had a question.
So I do have a question, I guess, and the question is this: where does morality enter into the calculation, or and does it enter? I mean, what you have, I think, shown to us, all three of you, is that distraction is an entirely relative thing, and that there's a distinction to be made between distraction and inattention. Although, of course, we sometimes use the word distraction to mean inattention. That's not the kind of distraction you're talking about. The kind of distraction you're talking about is when we are doing something that we feel we shouldn't be doing. We should be busy doing something else that we regard as productive or good in some way. This gets to your question of what truly matters. But how do we decide what truly matters? What standards are we going to use? And I have often found, in similar way as what Ed Cranston said, that when I'm doing something that I originally began doing thinking I was distracting or being distracted, ended up being not a distraction at all. So, I mean, others have asked the same question. What are the standards then that we use? At what point does something that was distraction cease to be distraction? And does it require the assignment of a good, some sort of benefit? This term, when you said useless, I wouldn't have translated the Wu Yi in Yan Yuan's quotation there as useless. I would have without benefit, right? Without profit. And that requires us to make decisions about what is good and what is not good, I think. I'd like your thoughts on that.
So I'll say something, and then you can all chime in. I mean, I think the issue of morality is really central to this, right? And but for advocates or for champions or defenders of distraction, the morality associated with the criticism of distraction is the morality of social norms. That you're in graduate school, you should be working on the dissertation, not playing video games. You're in the workplace, you should be doing your spreadsheets and not, paying attention to the college basketball tournament. And so it's against that distraction is sort of touted as a freedom, right? And I think in that sense, there is this argument that the morality of distraction is the morality of personal freedom, that this idea that there is freedom. But I think internal sort of compunction. I think the main point I'd like to make is the internal compunction that worries about the fact that video games are so addictive and so compulsive is this keen sense that time is limited, right? And that somehow just using that time in this way isn't the best way. Now, we may not know exactly what the best way is, but one has a sense that doing video games all day is not the best way to spend a life. And I think that sense is whether it's articulable as why that should be, but that sense is that inner morality that's quite important. And as I think everybody agrees, as Ed says, that there's a degree in which too rigid a purposefulness, directionality is limited. It hampers creativity. But at the same time, this fear that somehow one's not devoting time to the proper ends, I think that's sort of an interesting way to think about the nature of inner morality.
I was thinking about, I don't know if morality is actually about values, and one of the things that really interested me about the burning paper money is it really asks us questions about what is valuable and what is actually being valued, and it seems that I don't know, even money itself, or the concept of vanity or vanitas is the question of our pursuits worthwhile. So it seems that distraction as a concept actually asks us these questions about what we value and what we do not value, rather than relativize it. I don't know if that makes sense, but I feel that so for example, if you burn like a castle and these are worldly things, how do worldly things translate into filial piety? Like how does is what matters what you can buy for one's parents, or is it what matters is the genuineness of your intentions or something? So I don't know. I'm not making too much sense. Sorry.
I mean, again, I think the social or the cultural context is absolutely key. But I ran across this piece a couple days ago in which ALEC, the American Legislative Educational Exchange Council, defined natural resources as a source of material wealth. And that's all they are. So if something is not turning into a source of material wealth, if it is not becoming money, it is of no value. And that's what I try to show with mountaintop removal, that here's where we see complete undistracted attention to one particular pursuit of material value can end up with something with, I mean, the public health repercussions are astounding with that. And as we know, sort of the public health repercussions with a lot of the pursuit of material value. If we think of the Fukushima reactor as a reflection of that, it falls in the same way. So, what is moral, I think, also then needs to be a matter of where, perhaps with great distraction in the kind of that Ed is discussing, and you are as well, where it's a kind of creative process where we let things in that we don't expect. And if we think of distraction that way, that can be wonderful, and it can perhaps make us see things that we wouldn't otherwise, and sources of harm that we wouldn't see otherwise. And I'd love to distract a lot of people who are really focused on wealth.
I think Florin had a question, then maybe Andy. Okay, yeah, sorry.
Okay, so my question is involves a poll. Involves taking a poll. So you're asked in a very provocative way what truly matters, right? And this is a religious question, actually, because this question implies that we should live our lives in a certain way or not, or how should we live our lives. So I want to ask you, what do you think truly matters? What is the answer to the question?
That's tomorrow's Friday's lecture. This is I think that I mean, I don't have a simple answer to that, but I think the key to it is this sense of temporality, the sense that life is limited, and therefore we judge what matters depending on how we think about, that use of time. So I think there are many things that give us pleasure and that are sort of addictive. It's not just video games. I think, for example, earlier, the reading of novels was often criticized as that kind of guilty pleasure, right, as opposed to reading serious works. And if we feel, to the extent that one feels guilty about doing one thing rather than another, I think it is this inner sense, often not necessarily well articulated or conscious, that there is something else that matters, right? That we're not doing what really matters, even though we may not even have an articulated sort of set of principles about what matters. We have the sense, as translated in our activities and our judgments about what we should be doing or we don't do. Final question, Andy, and then we'll finish up.
Question that's perhaps simpler than the one you were just asked, but but there's a point behind it. How would you answer the poll yourself? Those two questions. Please don't evade it.
So, my hope is actually in the last category, and I actually forgot, but I would have liked to ask the people who chose less distracted, how they imagined us becoming less distracted, because I think because of the focus on technology and the proliferation of sort of all the forms of entertainment, the impulse is to think that we're becoming more and more distracted, and it's hard to imagine how we can disconnect ourselves in ways that make us less distracted. But I guess I'm basically a yin-yang type of person, and think that there are these rhythms, and that we will figure out ways to, I think there's definitely a limit to the amount of distraction or stimulation one can absorb, and that we will figure out strategies to sort of restore the balance, as it were.
Yeah, that's it. I had actually taken the direction of your talk to be an argument against some linear notion of things getting more distracted over time, because your examples were from so many places and so many times. But it's so hard to let go of the idea with technology that we are more distracted. I can't let go of that belief that that's where we've been moving.
Yeah.
So it's really fascinating. Well, thank you. This was great.
So listen. Pay attention. There are two things I want you to do. In reverse order, you will go to a reception in Lisa's honor.